Jill, what brought you into the profession of counselling psychologist?
I think it was my background, really, the way I was brought up. I was raised in what you might call a fundamentalist sect called the Exclusive Brethren. And I think as I entered adulthood, I became very aware that that upbringing had affected me in many ways. And I became interested in psychology and then eventually in therapy and counselling.
So what was it like then, being brought up in the Exclusive Brethren?
That's quite a big question, really, which would perhaps take a whole programme to answer.
Well, what's relevant to your profession as a counsellor now?
I think the feeling of deprivation, really, that I didn't get the exposure to the normal sort of world that other people had. I wasn't, for example, allowed to make friends.
Where was it? In Britain?
In Britain,
yes.
Southeast England, yes.
And did you live in an exclusive building or something? Isolated?
My whole family were in the Exclusive Brethren, as were their predecessors. So it's a cult or a sect that is very much about families. You don't get what's the word I'm looking for? You don't convert into the group. So you're born into it.
You're born into
yes.
it, and you're prevented from speaking to people outside it, or what's
You are very much now. When I was a child, I was allowed to go. I did go to an ordinary school, but I say ordinary. It didn't feel very normal to me as a child. I felt different. I felt that I couldn't really be friends with the children at the school. I was ostracised by them.
Is it a Christian sect?
Supposedly, yes.
Okay. And why did they ostracise you?
At school?
Yes.
Because they knew I was different. They knew I wasn't allowed to go out and play with them, that I wasn't allowed to have them back at home, and I couldn't go to their homes in the way that children normally do when they're making friends.
Are your patients today people who've been subjected to similar conditions as a child?
Some of them have been. Some of them have been exposed to other kinds of conditions, such other forms of child abuse, such sexual abuse, physical abuse. I'm very interested in religious abuse, but I haven't really felt, at times I haven't really felt that I can help people yet. I feel that I'm not quite at that point.
The phrase religious abuse may be new to some people. What do you mean by it?
What do I mean by it? I mean, by religious abuse, I mean that children are not brought up to develop their own belief systems. They're indoctrinated into the belief system of the group that they're growing up with. So in my case, I didn't know that there was another perspective on the world other than the Exclusive Brethren one. I wasn't aware of it at all.
Do you think that the Exclusive Brethren and similar sects are just one end of a continuum? I mean, would you say that any religious upbringing has something of the same elements?
It could do. It depends how wise the parents are. Parents have as you know, parents have a tremendous influence on children's belief systems and on what they grow up, what values and attitudes they grow up to hold. And it would have to be a very tolerant family, I think, a family that was prepared to be open and flexible in their teaching.
What kinds of things are children taught which you might think of as abusive? Indoctrination, would that be the word?
Indoctrination is the word, really, because I believe children brought up in schools such as the Exclusive Brethren now have for their own children don't teach children to critically reflect on the information they receive. And in fact, the information is usually restricted anyway. So the curriculum in the school will be restricted to areas that that particular group approve of. So exclusive children, for example, or children of exclusive parents, I should say, are not allowed to read fiction. They're not allowed to use the computer. They're not allowed to speak to anybody outside of the group. So their information is very restricted. They know nothing about any other perspective on the world or any other belief system.
Are they actually frightened? I mean, do they get taught about hellfire and things like that?
Absolutely, and I remember that very clearly as a child. If I think back to my childhood, it's one that's kind of dominated by fear. And it was a fear of disapproval while in the present, but also of eternal damnation. And to a child, images of hellfire and gnashing of teeth are actually very real. They're not metaphorical at all.
Of course not.
No,
No.
and I actually remember spending quite a lot of my childhood. We did spend a lot of our time in church, although they called it the meeting room. Kind of living in my own private world because I couldn't cope with what was being said around me, the messages that I was getting. I either didn't understand them or they were so terrifying that I didn't want to hear them.
You use the word metaphorical as though only children believe it's metaphorical. Do you think the people, the adults who told you about hell, thought it was metaphorical?
No, I think they believed
They
in
believed
it.
in it
They
too.
believed it actually happens, yes.
What do they tell you about it? I mean, what happens in hell?
It's strange, isn't it? After all this time, it still has the power to affect me when you ask me that question. Hell is a fearful place. It's complete rejection by God. It's complete judgment. There is real fire. There is real torment, real torture, and it goes on forever. So there is no respite from it.
If you were to compare, you used the word religious abuse, if you were to compare the abuse of bringing up a child really to believe in hell like that, how do you think that would compare in trauma terms with sexual abuse?
That's a very difficult question. Sexual abuse is a series of connected behaviours, but it's about the abuse of trust. I think there are a lot of similarities actually, because it is about abuse of trust. It is about denying the child the right to feel free and open and able to relate to the world in a normal way. It's a form of denigration. It's a form of a denial of the true self in both cases. I think they are comparative.
Yes. I mean, both of those would elicit fear, presumably,
Yes.
but you've also...
And guilt.
And guilt. But you've also... Yes, guilt very much so.
Yes.
You've also made reference to a kind of prevention of the child reaching its full potential. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, if you suppress the natural inquiring mind of a child, which I believe I was suppressed in that way, I was not allowed to ask questions, and I had lots of existential style questions in my head as a child, but I would never dare come out with them because the reprisals would have been quite severe.
What about less extreme religions than the exclusive brethren? Presumably, in your list of clients, you have people coming from all different sorts of religion. Do you meet the same kinds of problems with them as well?
Yes. There seems to be a continuum, in my opinion, between what you might call a healthy religion to an unhealthy or pathogenic type of religion. I think the exclusive brethren is at the severe end of that scale. I think it is possible to have a healthy attitude towards religion, but it would need to be a very open and flexible one, and certainly some of the Christian clients I've had have had that. They perhaps haven't even joined a church. They're Christians as an individual rather than as a group. I mean, the whole term religion is quite complicated, isn't it? Because you
Yes.
can have individual religion or you can have a
It
religious
means
system.
something to do with binding,
Yes.
which might
Yes.
strike a chord with you.
Yes,
perhaps.
absolutely,
Yes.
because I think Christians do have, they would call it an attachment to God or a close relationship with God, and presumably other religions would say that the same, that they have this strong attachment to a leader of some kind, a spiritual leader or a God of some kind.
Right.
Yes.
Do you help children or people, adults, to escape from this kind of entrapment?
I do help people to escape, but not in the way, not as a therapist. One way in which I help is to offer support to people that are leaving. And I do that, at the moment I've got quite a large email support group running which takes in people from all over the world. They all happen to be ex-exclusive brethren, mainly because they have a shared understanding of what they've been through. But I have actually also thought about expanding that and setting up other groups for people leaving other cults or sects. Because I think we all share the same kind of difficulties of leaving. The process of leaving is extraordinarily difficult. You're leaving behind a whole social network, a whole system that you've perhaps been brought up in. You're leaving behind a belief system that you've held for years. Very often you lose family. and friends.
What, because they won't talk to you
Because they
anymore?
won't talk to you anymore. No, that's right. You don't really exist anymore for them.
I've had letters from people in America saying they've read my books and have given up their religion as a consequence, but they daren't tell their family.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's one of the fears, and one of the fear is that if you do give up that faith, what will happen to you? Is there perhaps a God after all?
Could there be something there after all? Yeah.
That will kind of come down on you? And I mean, for years I couldn't think about whether I was a Christian or not.
Yes.
It was too scary. But where were we before they?
Well,
cut us?
I'll ask you about the difficulties of leaving.
Ready for you.
Can you tell me something about the problems people face when they try to leave a sect like the Exclusive Brethren?
Yes, it affects people in a number of different ways, really. For a start, the sect is a very closed set network. It's their social environment, it's their social network, it's their whole belief system. So when they leave, they're leaving all of that, and they don't know what they're leaving it for, because the outside world is very unknown to them. They're also leaving all their family and their friends behind, because usually when you leave a closed group or a cult, you're not allowed to have contact with people outside at all. So there's a huge sense of loss, but also this kind of discombobulation about, well, what do I believe in now? Where have my beliefs gone? It feels very much as if someone's pulled a rug from under your feet.
Yes. You were telling me a story about a man who got in touch with you trying to leave.
Within cults, or sects, you often find dissenters amongst them, but who don't dare to leave, and they will often behave in a secretive manner. So this particular young man had a laptop computer and a digital camera and a mobile phone hidden in his bedroom. And using this equipment, he got in touch with me via the internet.
They were hidden. What would have happened to him if they'd been discovered?
He would have been, if they had discovered his equipment, he would have been thrown out of the group. And that would have meant instant loss of all his family and his friends and his job, because they all worked for each other within the group.
So you were saying he got in touch with you?
He got in touch with me, and we communicated first of all by email, and then we met a few times. And I think he developed a double life in a way. There was his life with me and one or two other people outside, and his life in the cult, and the two weren't meeting at all, really, and he was therefore able to manage that. But then we got involved in some filming for a television programme about the Exclusive Brethren, and all of a sudden his worlds collided and he couldn't really cope with it anymore. And of course also the Brethren found out about his equipment and put a lot of pressure on him to withdraw from the programme, which sadly is what he did. The programme still went out, but it was very much changed in content.
Right. What other stories can you tell about patients, obviously in confidence, patients that you've assisted to leave cults and sects?
Yes, when we say I've assisted them to leave, I haven't actually assisted in the process of leaving. What I've done is helped them after they've left. Yes. There was another young man who had huge problems socially. He didn't know how to go, I mean, from a very simple basis, he didn't know how to go into a pub and order a pint of beer.
I can imagine.
You know, and eating in a restaurant was total anathema. Yeah. And he didn't know about what his rights were in the real world. He didn't know who to go to ask for advice. He didn't know about solicitors and lawyers and insurance companies. He didn't know about any of those things. So there's a lot of life skills that are missing, and that kind of information that you need to exist in the real world. But he also seemed to have a deficit in terms of social skills, but also in being able to think through things and make decisions and make choices. Because when you're in a group like the Exclusive Brethren, all those things are very often done for you. You don't have to make a choice. You don't have to make a decision. Someone else makes it for you. You actually don't even have your own individual sense of moral conscience. It's called an assembly conscience. So what's right and what's wrong, and there's never any grey in the middle, it's always right or wrong, is defined for you by the group.
You used the word abuse a moment ago. It seems to me that you've entirely borne out the justification for that word in that story and the other story. What do you think is the motivation of the, what are they called, elders, the people who run the church for doing this kind of really horrific thing to children, really stultifying children and in effect ruining their lives? Why would they want to do that?
It's something to do with control and a sense of power, the sense of power that they achieve or they experience in controlling the environment of all these people. And of course they fall from grace, as the phrase goes. That, by the way, is another way of controlling people, is to have a language that is unique to a group so that outsiders don't understand it. So fall from grace is one that the exclusive brethren use quite a lot for leaders that in some way transgress or they come into conflict with another leader. It's a kind of a power game they're playing.
Is it, or is it that they don't know better because they themselves were raised in the
yes,
church?
I'm sure that fits in there somewhere. I mean, a lot of people, for example, a lot of people will criticise their parents for the way they brought them up. I don't criticise mine because I know that they were trapped in the same system that I was trapped in. And in fact, it was because they decided to leave when I was 16 that I'm sitting here today, or I might still be in that group. So it was their strength of purpose and their psychological resilience that enabled them to get up one day and walk out.
I suppose it could be said that all of us are, to some extent, trapped by our upbringing.
Absolutely.
And what
yes.
the exclusive brethren demonstrated in you and in other people is an extreme, which perhaps teaches us a lesson for how to bring up children in
Yes.
the, quote, real
In the real world. Yes, absolutely.
So what's the message? That children should be allowed to think for themselves, that children should be allowed to make decisions? Not totally, presumably. That you could go too far the other way.
You could go too far the other way and leave children feeling somewhat bewildered by the almost chaotic, a feeling of chaos perhaps, if you gave them too many choices. They do need structure, don't they? But they need to be allowed to hear different perspectives on things. They need to be allowed to investigate. They need to be allowed to develop their critical faculties so that they can take a number of different viewpoints and weigh them up and decide which one is for them. They need to find their own pathways, not be forced into a particular mould, which is how I feel happened to me as a child, and that was 45 years ago, and here we are today, and I still feel sometimes that there's a legacy of that upbringing, and I'm sure most of us would agree with that.
I'm an ethologist, an animal behaviourist, and one of our favourite things is imprinting.
Yes.
Goslings at a certain age imprint on the parent figure. In a critical period of life, do you think there are critical periods of human child development during which this kind of abuse is particularly abusive, particularly influential?
I think what you say is absolutely correct, that there are critical periods. In fact, it's an area that I'm particularly interested in at the moment, and I'm sort of trying to explore a little bit, because I've always had the sense that when you use the word friend, I actually don't know what you mean. It seems
Still.
as if, I really don't know what you mean. And I'll be heard to say suddenly when I'm talking with somebody, oh, is that what being a friend means? And they'll say, well, yes. I'll say, oh, okay. So for a little while I've got that concept and I can hold on to it, but then I lose it again. It's as if there's something kind of missing there. And I'll tell you another story. I read your article recently called Viruses of the Mind. And I read it, and as I read it, I thought, how does this person have the confidence to be so authoritative about such a controversial area? Is he not afraid of being criticised? Well, and I also thought, well, actually there are some parts in this paper that I feel slightly ill at ease with. But I couldn't focus on it. I found it really hard to actually critically reflect on that paper and a number of other papers in a way that was productive. I had to go and get permission almost from someone else to do it. So I raised the whole area with a friend of mine, and he started talking about it, and it kind of gave me permission to do the same. And I found that quite interesting, because I think, at this age I ought to know by now what critical reflection means. But actually, I think in some parts, sometimes I actually don't. It's as if something hasn't developed, and I feel angry about that sometimes. I really feel angry about it.
And I can't help feeling if somebody as intelligent as you suffers from that, just think what it must be like for the majority.
Yes.
What age do you think then is the critical? I mean, for example, language development. It's familiar that if somebody learns a language after a certain age, they will never get rid of their accent, whereas if they learn it before, it's easy. Is it as critical as that, do you think?
It may not be quite as critical as that. I don't think there's been any studies so far that actually demonstrate a critical period for cognitive development or social development. Social development, I think maybe there is more work has been done. That because as a child, exclusive brethren don't get to rehearse friendships. They don't get to experiment. What will happen if I nudge my friend? What will happen to that friendship if I push him in the pond? They don't get to do things like that. So
that is a real deprivation, which,
yes.
I mean, experiments on monkeys at least would suggest that it could be very serious to be deprived of that kind of social contact at an early age. Do you think the teenage years are important in this?
I think they are, and it was in the teenage years actually that I felt the isolation at school much more. The alienation was more profound during my teenage years. I was much more aware of it. I was more aware of the children in the school ostracising me. They would be talking in the playground, giggling about their boyfriends or whatever, and if I approached, they would say to me, "Go away, you wouldn't understand." And
that is so cruel.
Yeah, I mean, the children were, the other teenagers were being teenagers. They were, that's what children do.
Yes.
What felt cruel to me was the fact that I didn't really understand why I couldn't join in their conversations. But I used to comfort myself with another thing that the brethren say, and that is that, well, never mind, I've got the light, I've seen the truth, I'm one of the special elite, I'm going to be all right.
Nice, modest sentiment.
Yes, and I remember times when I distinctly recall having those thoughts in my head.
It's a kind of combination of smugness and cruelty, which is a very unlovely combination, isn't it?
There are a lot, yes, and that's a kind of double message, which mirrors another one that I had, and these verses still reverberate in my head. One of them I've misremembered. I remember it as "Thou shalt be judged and found wanting," whereas actually it is "Thou shalt be weighed in the balances and found wanting." But the opposite one, the antithesis, is "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." So childhood is about striving not to be judged, striving for that conditional love, because it wasn't unconditional. That unconditional positive regard just wasn't around. But at the same time, striving for those rewards, those well-dones. But thou good and faithful servant. It was breadcrumbs off the table I was looking for, not real valuing, not really somebody actually valuing the strengths that I had, the good things about me, my true self. It felt like, looking back, it felt like it was a kind of proxy self. It wasn't really me. And I look back on my childhood sometimes and think, did I really exist? That wasn't me. It felt like I was asleep. Or someone used the phrase once, it was like a living dead. Yes, there were times when life was great, when life was fun, but there were also huge chunks of time when it wasn't. And I fear for the children today. I really fear for them. The children of the exclusive brethren, or the children of any other group that's as closed as that and as pathogenic as that. Because now they not only have their home life and their church life, but they now are getting their school life. All three important areas of their lives, all giving them the same message, that they're worthless, shapen in sin, shapen in iniquity, born in sin, shapen in iniquity.
Do you think it's important that we shouldn't concentrate on the exclusive brethren exclusively? Because, after all, there are so many other religions,
Absolutely.
and some of them may be even worse, but some of them may be not as bad, but nevertheless having something like the same traumatic effect upon child development and psychology.
Oh yes, I think, yes, there are. There's a very large number of groups, some Christian, some not Christian, that have the same kind of... I keep thinking about the Muslim group, actually, and the repression of women in particular, and how hard it... I mean, I think women leaving any group that's patriarchal in its setup is Well, we don't really have, I think one writer called it the realistic rite of exit. When we leave, we actually don't have what we need to survive outside, and yet we should have the right. We have the right to choose to leave, whether it's choosing to leave the religion or choosing to leave the culture, or if they're entwined, then you're leaving both.
Of course, it doesn't help if the rules state that you shall not only be ostracised by your family, but actually killed.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, physically killed, but
Yes.
of course you can also be psychologically killed.
Yes.
And I think that is not so permanent in a sense, but it's still nevertheless devastating.
What sorts of things do you tell your patients when they've come out and they're trying to get adjusted?
Well, as a therapist, I tend not to tell people anything because I like to empower them to come to their own place, wherever they're comfortable. But I encourage them to tell their stories because that's what I needed when I left. It feels right that they should be validated and they should get the chance to tell the story without me judging them, without me offering them anything other than unconditional regard, without advising them, because they've had all that. They need to develop their own ways of thinking, which by listening to them and reflecting on what they're telling me, I can actually facilitate that process.
Can you facilitate their getting some sort of an alternative family or something to take the place of the family that has disowned them?
Well, it's quite interesting you should say that, because I think they do tend to gravitate towards groups. My research on the exclusive brethren demonstrated that when people left, they tended to join a similar brethren group, but one that wasn't quite as extreme to begin with. Very high percentage of them did
Sort of
that.
gradually weaning themselves off.
Exactly, they gradually wean themselves off, and then sort of now, very few of them belong to one of those brethren groups. They've either given up going to church altogether, or they've joined the Church of England or some other religious group. And interestingly, my nephew, when he left about 8 years ago, when he left the exclusive brethren about 8 years ago, he immediately wanted to join the army, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yes.
He went straight down to the army recruiting centre. Fortunately for him, he was too young, so they couldn't, at that point offer him anything. But it was interesting that he wanted to find another group to belong to. And if all your life you've belonged to a group with very strong borders and you leave it, that's a huge loss, isn't it?
An American colleague of mine, wrestling with the problem of why America uniquely in the Western world is a country of religious maniacs, came up with a suggestion that because it's a country of immigrants who've left their extended family back in Europe, they needed a substitute family. And so churches filled the role of substitute family, and that's why they got such enormous power and still do. That seems to chime in a bit.
That does chime in very, very well with what I was saying. Yes, I hadn't thought of that perspective. That's a very interesting one, isn't it? As humans, we do tend to want to live in social groups.
That is what churches often provide.
Yes.
People often will not just go to church on Sunday, but belong to go to coffee mornings and kind of treat the church as a sort of
social
extended
group.
family, a social group.
And in fact, my research again showed that if people were attending church regularly, they were actually experiencing less mental distress than people who weren't. So there was a protective function to it. It didn't depend on whether they believed or not, it depended on their actual attendance, which suggests that it's the social group that's important, the network, the structure that it provides them.
Yes. You mentioned a while back that you thought religion could be healthy. What did you mean by that?
Well, religion can provide... Sorry, I'll start that again because quite too many thoughts came into my head at that point. Religion can provide an explanation for people. It can provide an interpretive framework about why the world exists, where it came from, all the kind of existential questions that people ask.
From a psychological point of view, does it matter if that's true, the explanation that they...
No, not if the person is satisfied with it.
Okay.
If they believe in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't even need evidence. They can
have
this faith. They can have this faith in something, and it provides them with a structure, with a way of life and a belief system that they're okay with, as long as they don't start asking questions. And of course, once they start doing that, then the whole edifice can crumble. But it also provides other things. I mean, the whole ritual of a religion provides a means by which you can express emotion, for example. It helps you get through critical events in life, like death. And in that sense, it can offer hope, because most religions have a sense of an afterlife or a reincarnation, for example. The whole process of prayer, I believe, has a lot of similarities to therapy. When you're praying, you're talking to somebody. That person is listening, or you believe he's listening, and it is a he. And the whole process of talking through something helps us to cognitively process whatever it is that's troubling us.
Of course. Yeah.
So you're having a relationship with some supernatural being, and it does actually help you work through some of your things that are troubling you.
There's a famous computer program called Eliza, which you may have heard of, which is I think it's actually a psychoanalyst, but I mean it's programmed to behave like
a person,
like a person, and it's very successful.
It is actually very successful. Yes.
So you're talking to an imaginary friend, and it's fine. It doesn't matter that it's not really there.
That's right.
It still works.
That's right. As long as you believe. I mean, the point about God is that the supernatural being is that the people believe he does exist. So when they're talking to him in prayer, or even just walking along the street, I mean, not everybody has to kneel down to pray to this God. They can ask for advice, they can ask him to help them make choices and decisions about life. And there's somebody listening. And that's what I do as a therapist, I listen. And that is the most valuable thing you can do for a human being, is to listen. Of course, I don't just listen, I'm actually answering as well, or I'm talking with them.
That is fascinating, actually. I hadn't quite got my head around that.
And I think also religion, it's consoling. It can be comforting. The problem is, of course, that it's very easy when you've got all that to get sucked into something that is more pathogenic, a bit further down towards the other end of the continuum.
Yes.
And that's the danger.
Your experience yourself as being born into a cult, and your patients, I think, are mostly born in as well.
Yes.
What about people who are born again, people who are sucked in by evangelists, by people who have recruited them? Maybe they're feeling lost and vulnerable and adrift. Do you meet some patients like that who've been, as it were, captured by cults of this sort?
I haven't actually met any clients like that, no. But I have met people in life, in the course of life, who are born-again Christians. It's a concept that I've never really fully understood. And in fact, some people who are born into cults often go through the process of being born again too. You don't have to be someone who's never been religious before. It is a strange phenomenon, and I think it does require the person to be vulnerable at some level for them to be caught up by the excitement of being born again, and I think that there is an element of that. And I often think that people at universities perhaps are susceptible, because they're discovering all these new ways of being, and it's quite a stressful time as well, and they're looking for something, they're looking for meaning. The search for meaning is something that humans seem to engage in at some point.
I mean, it's notorious that the first week of a freshman's arriving in university, they are descended upon by the Christian this and the Christian that and the Christian the other. They don't leave them alone.
No, they don't.
Yes.
That's right. And so they are vulnerable, and it's perhaps the first time they've been away from home, so they haven't got that structure behind them anymore.
Yeah, and they're offered friendship,
love bombing, as it's
called. Love bombing,
yes. Offered a lot of things that perhaps they've been deprived of in the past as well.
And once again, I come back to the question of the motive of the people doing the love bombing. Do you think they really believe what they're promoting?
That's a good question. It's $1 million question, really. I think a lot of them do really believe in it.
And that makes it all the more dangerous.
And that it does make it all the more dangerous. I think maybe the people at the top, some of them don't believe in it. They've built this kind of empire almost, and they are the earthly god sitting at the top, and they are the only ones that are in touch with the supernatural god sometimes. Everything is a conduit through them.
Yes.
To the man of God, might be called. But the whole euphoria that comes with born-again Christians, I mean, we know about that the brain produces its own natural opiates, the endorphins, and I think that there is a physiological background to all of this as well.
That's fascinating too.
You know, I mean, rituals. There's a link between rituals and prayer and meditation and intense intense religious experiences and the production of endorphins.
Has it actually been shown that endorphins are, say, released when people listen to, what, plain song or that kind of hypnotic religious ceremony?
I'm not sure.
No, nor am I.
We could check that one out.
Yes.
But I mean, they have demonstrated, for example, we've laughed just now, and endorphins and laughter go together too, and endorphins and singing. So, of course, all the church singing is improving people's sense of well-being.
Yes. Do you worry about faith schools as a sort of light version of what you went through, or do you think they are completely harmless?
Well, there are faith schools and there are faith schools. There are some that are very restrictive.
Sorry.
Shall we start with that one then?
Yeah,
Can't we sit here and talk all day then?
We could, I'm sure we could.
I'd love to talk to you again because I'm writing a book.
Oh, are you?
And it would be really helpful if I could.
Well, I'd love that actually. I really would.
Okay.
You know, more relaxed, not with the camera on us.
You were very convincing on the health benefits of religion, consoling and things like that. Is there a downside as well, and what would that look like?
What I would call a more unhealthy type of religion, for a start, tends to diminish the self, diminish the identity of the person. So instead of the person being valued for their strengths and their potential, they're seen as wicked, sinners, shapen in iniquity, as I said earlier, and even when they do good works, it's not really them that's doing it. It's God working through them. So there's this sense of helplessness, really. There's nothing I can do to save myself. And sin is not seen as something that's inevitable, which perhaps is a more positive way of looking at it. But sin is seen as something that is to be judged, and that forgiveness is extremely difficult. And shame and guilt and fear, everything is controlled by those three emotions. So if you transgress, you feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel fear because of the consequences of that. There is a tendency for unhealthy religions to have a very absolutist, rigid way of thinking about things. So everything is seen as either or. You're a sinner or you're saved. Think there's truth or it's not truth. There's absolutely no room for ambiguity or uncertainty in the middle. And life actually isn't like that.
No.
Life is not in, all or nothing. There's this huge area in the middle where most of us live.
Do you think among the impoverishments that children suffer from such an upbringing is a lack of ability to make moral judgments for themselves, constantly relying upon what? Upon the moral judgments of the community?
They tend to... I'll start that again. I think children raised in closed groups like this have a tendency to take on what I call the assembly conscience. So it's a moral judgments given to them by the people around them. And if their parents and their church and their school are all the same people, then that's all they ever hear. They only ever hear the moral judgments of their particular group. And it's interesting once, actually. Can I tell you a little story?
Please, yeah.
I lived in Switzerland for a while. I was married, I had 2 small children, and I went into a children's clothes shop and I saw this lovely tweed coat in there, and it reminded me of home. So I felt moved towards buying this coat, and I picked it off the shelf, took it up to the counter, and then I saw it had it was double-breasted, 2 rows of buttons. Oh, I don't like double-breasted coats, came into my head. And it was like suddenly I had what you might call an epiphany, I suppose, because it suddenly struck me, hang on a minute, it's not me that doesn't like double-breasted coats, it's my mother. So I bought the coat, and I walked out the shop, and it suddenly struck me very forcibly that actually an awful lot of my beliefs, an awful lot of my attitudes and my values were not mine. They were either imparted to me by my parents or by the church, and of course as a child that was one and the same thing.
Yeah.
And I walked out and I went home, and I actually felt that I wanted to go out and commit murder just to find out for myself whether it was right or wrong.
Yes.
I hasten to add I didn't, but there was that feeling that I wanted to go out there and explore for myself what was right for me, what was wrong for me.
I suppose a non-religious moral upbringing might start with something like the golden rule, and a child is told, how would you like it
Yes.
if somebody else did that to you, so why do you do it to them? Would that be a foreign concept to the exclusive brethren, because they would
Yes.
say it's wrong because God says it's wrong, or the elders say it's wrong?
I think in a lot of religions that is the case, that a moral sense is not, an individual moral sense is not developed. It is what the Bible says, or what the Quran says, or whatever the particular religious book is, or what the leaders say is right or wrong. So it's not about, yes, it's not about the golden rule, it's not about how would you like it if somebody did that to you.
So it's a stultification of the moral sense and of the intellectual sense, because you've already talked about how the intellectual route to inquiry by a child is stultified. And now
Yes.
you're saying also that the moral route is stultified as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I can't really think of any aspect of growing up that isn't stultified by that kind of upbringing.
Yes.
Which is quite serious, really.
Yes, it really is.
Very serious.
What about faith schools more generally? Do you see them as harmless, or do you think they have a kind of light version of the problem that you're talking about?
They may have a light version of the problem, but it's all, I mean, children really must be given the right to choose themselves which pathway they're going to follow. So any faith school that does not allow that, to me, is not fulfilling the purpose of education. They're actually denying the child its basic human rights. And in my experience, I don't know of a faith-based school that would be that open, but there may be one out there. I don't know. The ones I know about, they're not. They actually restrict the curriculum to such an extent that the child is not given that freedom.
Now that's interesting, because that's a different objection to the usual one against faith schools, which is that they breed exclusivity, that they breed sectarian divisiveness, that children become labelled with the badge Catholic or Protestant or Muslim or whatever it is. And you've raised a different point, which could be just as damaging, I would have thought.
Yes, I mean, I think there are a number of different ways of looking at it, aren't there? Perhaps I've picked up on the one that perhaps affected me the most, or has affected the people around me.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
affected my patients the most, that's right. But they are divisive. I mean, I do know that although the inspectors give some of these schools very good reports, if you look carefully into the reports, you do read comments like, not enough attention is being paid to the understanding of other cultures or other religions. Questioning tends to be rather lacking it's not very challenging, it's not investigating, doesn't encourage the children to explore. So if you look amongst the small print, you will find those comments. And I don't like any form of segregation myself, so I would prefer to see religion and education separated.
Yes.
I'd like to see politics and education separated.
Yes. Not much hope of that under the present government.
No.
Does it, do you think, have detrimental effects on the rest of education, in the sense that the child is less inquisitive, less inquiring, less curious?
Yes, I mean, unhealthy religion would not encourage children to ask questions. And the consequences of asking a question could be quite punitive in a way. And the kind of existential questions that children ask when they're young are discouraged, are actively discouraged by a lot of these
things like, why
groups.
do I exist?
Why do
why
I
is
exist?
there a
Are you
world?
really there?
Yes.
You know, or are you just a figment of my imagination? One I had was, well, why does it mean that just because blood was shed on the cross that I'm to be saved? I don't understand that.
I can well believe you didn't understand it.
I just couldn't understand that.
I could well believe it.
And one day, I think it was Billy Graham, I happened to be hearing Billy Graham, this was after we came out of the Brethren actually, he said something about, why do you all think you're going to understand God? God is so much a higher being. Why should you possibly even think that you could understand him? You just have to accept and have faith. And I thought, oh yes, that's the answer.
Yeah.
And for a while,
Nice
my
and easy answer.
spirit was quieted for a while,
Yes.
but it didn't last very long.
Yes.
But yes, I think as children, the problem with many of these religions is that they don't allow children to ask questions, that naturally inquiring mind of the child is suppressed. and that is very detrimental, because they never see any other perspective, they never hear any other perspective, and so they don't learn to criticise, they don't learn to evaluate what they're hearing. They just blindly accept it, really, and that kind of religion to me is unhealthy.
I suppose there's an inevitable tendency for children to believe what they're told by their elders, their parents, their teachers, but somehow, would it be fair to say that religion gratuitously adds to that inevitable effect?
Well, it does, if there's yet another authoritative being
well,
up
quite
there
apart from that, I mean, religious education makes it even harder for children to develop the inquisitive curiosity that any good educator
because
would
religion
wish.
is absolute, you mean? Because
Yes.
it tends to say this is the truth,
Yes.
and there is no other truth.
Yes.
This is it. Yes, yes. If you don't believe what they're saying to you, then somehow that's a shortcoming in you. It's turned round. It's you that's lost your faith. It's not the religion that's wrong. It's not the truth that's wrong, or that something's wrong with what they're saying to you. It's you. Somehow it's a shortcoming in yourself. And again, you're made to feel guilty for not believing in it totally.
Do they actually warn you that there will come a time when people will tell you things that sound different from what you're being told by us?
Oh, yes.
There will come a time when people will tell you to be curious, to ask
Yes.
questions, to think for yourself.
Yes.
And what are you supposed to do about that?
You're supposed to ignore them. You're supposed to regard them as evil. I mean, my brother, who is still in the Exclusive Brethren, has described me as the embodiment of evil, and I'm now doing Satan's work. So if he hears about this television programme, he will see this as yet another example of Jill doing the work of Satan.
And that's because was programmed as a
Yes.
child to expect that kind of thing to happen?
Yes, anything that's outside is evil and wicked, and it mustn't be heard, it mustn't be listened to, and so discussion with the outside world is discouraged. Information coming in is very much controlled, and this is true of any religion, really, especially at that end of the spectrum. It becomes less as you move towards the more open types of religion.
Is there any suggestion that cults like this might actually be investigated by the police for what they're doing? I mean, I'm starting to think that perhaps protection of children from their own parents is something that one ought to seriously think about.
I totally agree with you, actually. I have on many occasions felt the need to talk about, what can we do? What have I done? We say, what have we done in the name of religion, but what have I done to kind of stop it going on happening? Because it is going on happening. As we're sitting here now, there are hundreds of children in schools, in faith-based schools, where they're being educated in the same way that their parents are educating them, in the same way that their church is educating them. The same kind of narrow-minded, blinkered way of looking at the world, that this is the absolute truth and it's the only way you can think about this.
Perhaps since there is so much public consciousness about child abuse, we should actually start using the phrase child abuse, mental child abuse, for this kind of thing. Not to say that it's necessarily as bad as physical child abuse, but nevertheless something serious, and it's not exaggerating to call it child abuse.
I don't think it's exaggerating to call it child abuse, and I've been saying this for some time now. Not everybody agrees with me. They look at you.
What do they
how
say?
can that be? How can it be mental abuse? You know, they're children. Somehow it's not seen as mental abuse. I called it religious abuse earlier, but it doesn't even have to be about religion. If you bring a child up and discourage it from thinking freely and making choices freely, then that's still, to me, that is a form of mental abuse or psychological abuse.
Or if you tell a child that when it dies it's going to roast forever in hell.
That is abusive, yes.
I should have thought that was a good candidate for being actually more abusive than at least some milder forms of sexual abuse.
If you think about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm not somebody that likes putting labels on things particularly, but there does seem to be something about trauma that creates a certain constellation of symptoms in people. And there is evidence that prolonged stress in childhood can lead to the same thing. It can lead to, I used to get flashbacks, I still do occasionally, and nightmares and hypervigilance and so on, all these kind of symptoms that people who are traumatised by car accidents, bombings, whatever, also experience. And And for me, psychological abuse is just as powerful in provoking that kind of symptomatology as sexual abuse or physical abuse. It can happen, and in my research I actually demonstrated that quite a high percentage of people were experiencing symptoms similar to those who've been through what's normally accepted as an acceptable trauma. Not an acceptable trauma,
No,
I mean a
but,
trauma that's
yes.
normally accepted by the medical profession as...
And you're talking now about mental abuse of the kind that we've
I am
just been...
talking about mental abuse,
Yes.
yes. Yes.
You yourself are not, if I may say so, a very good advertisement for what you're saying, because you seem so remarkably well adjusted. But no
But I
doubt
could, a moment ago, I told you that I was trembling and I was feeling fearful inside. That is kind of a precursor for me sometimes, that I will suddenly have a flashback. And anything could set it off.
Yes.
But it happens perhaps once a year now.
Yes.
But that is a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, and in any case, quite apart from your own feelings, you're a therapist who meets it in patients, and so you can actually
yes,
objectively
I have seen it. I have objectively
tell us
seen
about it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And no doubt many of the patients are in a much worse state than
Yes.
even the worst that you ever.
A lot of the former members of groups, religious groups that I meet, talk about the same kind of symptoms. They talk about nightmares, they talk about intrusive thoughts, they're not wanting to think about it and they're having to think about it. The kind of nightmares, disturbed sleep, anger, all the kind of things that you tend to see in someone who's been through a physical trauma or through sexual abuse.
You said that when they escape from the cult, they very often just go to a slightly less extreme one. Do any of them actually give up religion altogether?
Oh yes. It's interesting actually, because some of them give up religion altogether and don't attend a church and don't belong to a church.
I'm really just to say we forward, Richard. That's great. Keep leaning like that. Yep.
That's what you do, isn't it? In therapy, you lean forward.
Do you?
Yes. When you're interested, you lean forward.
None of this.
No, you lean forward because you want to encourage the other person to say more.
I don't like leaning. It makes me look hunchbacked if I'm.
You know, straighten your back of your neck. That's it. Then lean forward. That's perfect. Okay.
If you take any bits out of here that portray me as absolutist and rigid, I shall sue you.
Okay.
You didn't.